everyone. Welcome to the 14 Wins podcast, where we discuss the UFO phenomenon and all of its related high strangeness. I'm Bones, and with us, as always, is the notorious Ram X.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Ram. So this is a special episode because we are going to dive into the phenomenon of the Bigfoot. But first, we want to just briefly talk about the Nazca mummies because that story is ever developing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The Japanese scientists have examined some of the eggs, and they're coming back and saying those eggs are real.
Yeah.
So,
That's
I mean, that would have been the next step. Like, if those eggs were fake, then that would have put a hoax label on the whole thing.
right.
And that's not what happened. I mean, the
Right.
eggs came back real. There's nothing yet that has gotten in the way of this.
No, and I love that the Japanese are investigating it too, because when you look at their culture and their history, they don't have that kind of religious dogma that might be present in our Western society, or especially in the U.S.
Yeah, that's right. In South America, I think has that, and
for
also
sure.
the protection, as you pointed out, like the protections of the Peruvian people, and the protections of like the Egyptian people have long been
Right.
rumored to be. They want to say that it was their ancestors that did everything, of course, and
Right.
we
It's
don't
very
know that it
sensitive.
wasn't.
Right.
It's just a sensitive subject, but as soon as you get some sort of contact with NHI involved, there's a sensitivity there, and
Right.
we just have to explore it. We're not saying that your ancestors didn't build the pyramids, but they
Right.
may have had some coaching or something.
Right. Well, there's always, when it comes to Peru, there's always that contention. If you ever visit Peru, there's, I may have discussed this before in past episodes, but there's a lot of pride in the fact that they use these giant stones to create these structures. I mean, you're talking about stones that are like 50 to 60 tons. And so, it's a
Right.
it's somewhat of a mystery. I mean, how did they manage to do that? To levitate these giant boulders?
You use the word levitate.
I did use levitate. I mean, I should.
Great. Now we just blew our academic
right.
mass. Yeah, I don't know we don't know if they levitated them or not, but that would be the probable way of doing it if you had some sort of technology. And you and I were just talking before the podcast about a bunch of archaeoacoustic theories.
Oh yeah, there's that. You're talking about the theory about instruments being tuned to 432 hertz opposed to the 440 hertz. I don't know if that's like related to any like telekinesis power. It's interesting. Could be related. I mean, it does seem like everything's kind of related to how it sits in the spectrum.
Yeah, and you were mentioning how like 432 would have been too relaxing. So
Yeah, right. They think that
there was a conspiracy to raise the hertz to 440 for piano tuning.
evidently.
Did I
Yeah,
get that right?
Yeah, it's like in the 19th century, someone from Italy, I think, established the tuning fork, which is for all instruments to be tuned at 440 hertz, and then people say it used to be 432, and it's much more comfortable to the ear, and they did that because they didn't want people to become too relaxed, I guess, or enjoy the music too much. I'm not sure. I have to look into that more and talk about that in a later episode.
That's a fascinating little piece of tidbit there. I don't really think it's phenomenon related. It's just fascinating. And 14s are allowed to study whatever the heck we want. That's the great thing about being a 14. And since we can talk about whatever we want to talk about, I want to talk about something that makes us all happy. I want to talk about Bigfoot.
Bigfoot. How many different names does it go by?
Yeah, that's the title of our article, The Many Names of Bigfoot.
Right.
So it's seen all around the planet, and it's fascinating to people. There's a huge Bigfoot community. And I think that's why. Is because Bigfoot makes me happy. There's very few like scary Bigfoot stories compared to some of the other cryptids, which are always scary. There's many more stories of Bigfoot being some sort of forest giant that's peaceful.
Okay.
And those are all anecdotal reports, pretty much. There's very few multiple witness sightings that had material evidence, but there were some, and that's important. So
Right.
that's what we look for is, are there at least a few that meet like a standard that a court would use?
Right. And just like a lot of a lot of these cryptids, Bigfoot is very universal, right? I mean, it goes beyond cultural realms. It historically, you have Aborigines talking about similar Sasquatches that go back.
Yeah, the Native American legends too, of course. I mean, here and like you said, Aborigines, Australia, the Yowie is in Australia, and then
Right.
the Yeren in China.
The
And
Yeti, of course.
interesting. The Yeti, of course, in the Himalayas. Yeah,
Yep.
it's great. And the abominable snowman. I mean, that's what we
Right.
called it in the American, version of the Yeti.
Right.
And there's a culture, right? There's Bigfoot bumper stickers. There's Bigfoot erotica. Did you know that?
No.
It's a thing on Amazon.
Oh my.
I'm not judging. I mean, the gentle giant, like I said. So to get back to the more academic part of this, what we call it more on the academic side is a hairy hominid sighting.
Right.
So these hairy hominid sightings happen all over the globe, and this is a pretty big division among researchers. This is where the peanut butter chocolate gets the nastiest, I think, is in the Bigfoot territory. Because
Okay.
Bigfoot people really don't want Bigfoot to be related to UFOs per se.
Right.
There's a whole community and a whole culture, and there's people who come into the culture with different ideas about what Bigfoot is. And honestly, it's really cool. It's really fun. I can see why people get into it. I was watching this show about Bigfoot, and for a while I went to sleep with nothing but Bigfoot documentaries going because they were so happy and peaceful. And the people were so nice, So these guys had rigged out their truck with the coolest infrared system, and it was 360-degree infrared and thermal. And they had the monitors patched into the dash, and it was just the coolest thing. And they're just driving around in the woods with their cool mystery machine. And I'm like, why wouldn't you want to do that? Of course you
right.
love Bigfoot.
Yeah.
You love the search.
Right.
And so John Keel pointed that out in his book. And it was the eighth tower that made me think Bigfoot is probably not an undiscovered species.
So you're referring to not like a species that's been able to cloak itself and hide human
Yeah,
history?
let's talk about that for a second, because we can't prove a negative, and I don't want to
Right.
try. So is it
Right.
possible that Bigfoot is some undiscovered large mammal that happens to make its way around human habitats a lot? Sure, I guess, but it would have to hide its fossil record somehow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you would find they're not going to be as a living thing. It's not going to be immortal. You would eventually find remnants of a species like that, right?
Right. The pro Bigfoot is another species argument is that, oh, well, they're dying off in areas where we're just not finding them.
Right.
This ends up being sort of like the God of the Gaps argument, where if that's where you want to put Bigfoot, then the more territory that we find and uncover, then the less likely Bigfoot is to be a real creature.
Right.
So that could go on forever if you want it to. And if that makes you happy and you believe it, then that's great. Maybe it ends up being true. But Bigfoot would have had to hid the fossil record. And it can't just be dying off around undiscovered places because it's seen all the time around
Right.
human habitats.
Right. All around the world.
And it was Keel that really highlighted this for me. And I think it was in the Eighth Tower when he talks about one of the Bigfoot hunts that he was on. And it had helicopters and motorcycles and trained policemen and every kind of hunter you could imagine. And they were all searching this area where Bigfoot had just been seen recently. And they found nothing. And he looked at the amount of effort going into the hunt for one very large animal, a mammal that's over 7 feet tall.
Right.
And he said, this is impossible. It can't just be another species.
Right.
And I've been on some Bigfoot hunts, and they're fun. Like, don't you want to go walk around the woods with your friends and talk about monsters and not
Right.
really have to find anything?
Yeah. Right.
I would say I've seen scientists do a review where they were studying foxes in the same area where a Bigfoot hunt was happening, and they could track every fox in the area, and Bigfoot was not found.
Right. Right. Interesting.
So the odds of it being another species to us seem very unlikely.
No, then what? Yeah, what does that lead us to?
Well, I think that leads us right back to where we go with the Mothman and other types of cryptids, which is it's a extension of the phenomenon, this UFO paranormal activity that we've seen. And to offer a little substantiation to that, I would also point out that people report some of the things that they report in these paranormal and UFO encounters in Bigfoot encounters. And the big one, I would say, is the lack of sound that they report, that it ends up being something like the Oz effect. They say that there was an absence of sound in a very creepy way, and then they started to see something.
Right, right.
And at Skinwalker Ranch, they saw the same thing. An incredible scientist that we think very highly of, Colin Kelleher, saw a dino beaver, and he reported the same thing. He said that there was an absence of sound during the encounter. And then they saw something waddle around that shouldn't exist.
Right.
So that's what people tend to report in Bigfoot encounters. And then there's positive and negative Bigfoot encounters. But the stories, mostly anecdotal, tend to be more on the positive side, I would say, for the overall for the Bigfoot thing, or benign at least.
Right. And now that you mentioned it, I'm trying to think back of all the cases that I've read, and I don't recall ever like a real negative case where it was more of just a scary situation and there wasn't any like physical contact, or I can't recall anything like that.
Well, I can think of a case where there was a guy, and this was one that had material evidence. He was in the forest, and Bigfoot grabbed the back of his truck and picked it up.
Oh, okay.
And he was trying to drive away and scared the heck out of him. And I think he said it was trying to get a deer out of the back of his truck that he had taken out, a deer.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
There's one. I mean, and I can think of a few more like that. It seems to involve several that involve animal carcasses.
Huh.
I can also think of a famous Fortean that doesn't get mentioned a lot, Mr. Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh, really? Okay.
Teddy was exploring the frontier, and he engaged in a very Fortean process, which is to interview all these frontiersmen and ask them about the weird tales and strange things that they had seen. And he recorded it all. And you can read this today. And the tale that has a Bigfoot murder in it is called Bauman's Tale. Bauman and his friend were trappers who found a good stream to trap in, and they'd set up camp, and they were harassed by a couple of Bigfoot, and it escalated until one of them killed Bauman's friend, and Bauman made an escape on a horse.
Oh, wow.
So that was just Bauman's tale, and it was just a single witness account with no material evidence, but we like bringing it up because...
And that was documented by Teddy Roosevelt?
That's why.
Ah, that's pretty wild. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it's a good example of a Fortean process. There was another Fortean that goes before Fort, which is Robert Kirk, and he was the minister of Aberfoyle who went around collecting all these fairy stories in a very similar way that Teddy Roosevelt went around collecting these frontier stories. And that documentation is important to us because it may have some significance.
Definitely, yeah.
And so that's a great example of, obviously it wasn't called Bigfoot at that time.
Right.
So it wasn't called Bigfoot until 1958 when some tracks were uncovered by Jerry Crew, who was working on a crew, and he was a tractor operator, and he found some tracks. And those tracks are hotly debated. They might be fake. So It's kind of funny that Bigfoot got its name from what might be a fake set of tracks. I'm not going to debate whether those tracks are real. People get way deep into that, but I'll just say it's debated.
Right.
That was the beginning of Bigfoot. That's when Sasquatch became Bigfoot. Prior to that, it was Sasquatch.
And I think that comes from the Pacific Northwest, doesn't it? Sasquatch? I think that might be. Yeah.
Yeah. Sesquet, I think, is where they trace the term back to.
Yeah. Right.
And that's Northwest. So, but that's an interesting discussion in and of itself, because obviously Native American traditions are all oral.
Right.
That's very difficult to track, but these Native American legends, they really sound like something more paranormal or phenomenon or fairy related,
Right.
because they talk about trading with some of these Sasquatch tribes,
Oh, okay.
and they refer to them as people. In one of the tales that Roosevelt recorded, a hunter shot something that he thought was an animal, and it turned out to be a feral human boy, like a 15-year-old boy.
Oh, wow.
And then he was approached by a Sasquatch, which he
Oh.
made clear wasn't human. And the Sasquatch told him that he had shot his friend and that he would never hunt again. And according to the guy, he never hunted again. And the Sasquatch did all this through some sort of song.
Huh.
It's a very weird story, and it sounds less likely to be false because it's so specific and odd. It is just a single witness account, and this is more what we find in the Native American legends, which is that they're not people, but they're intelligent, and they're not like us. They have powers. They're extremely fast, they're extremely strong, and they have other abilities.
Right.
So that sounds a lot like everything else that we talk about. And we think that Bigfoot and Sasquatch is one extension of the same phenomenon. And that really ends up being Fort's theory, too. John Keel's, Jacques Vallée. I think we end up looking at the same phenomenon, and it's caused possibly by the same energy. And we find that Bigfoot encounters happen under the same circumstances as paranormal encounters, and that people who see Sasquatch tend to see it more than once. And some of the psychological conditions are similar. People say, I was going through a bunch of things, and next thing I know, I'm walking through the woods and I see Sasquatch. And
Right.
it seems to be related to the same phenomenon to
Right.
us.
And you can look at it in the same way, the way the phenomenon kind of comes and goes, right? It reveals itself, and then it's able to basically cloak itself at the same time with some powers of camouflage that are kind of just beyond us.
Yeah, just like UFOs. If
Right.
only we had seen a Sasquatch with a UFO.
Right.
Oh, wait, we have several times.
Oh. Do tell.
Yeah, in Western Pennsylvania, there's a very famous UFO and Fortean researcher named Stan Gordon. He's got a new book out called Creepy Cryptids. I haven't checked it out yet, but I'm sure it's worth checking out.
Okay.
And he looked into this extensively, several researchers with him, and they formed a little team to look into this. And in 1973, they looked into all these Bigfoot combination UFO instances, and they recorded it all. One of the ones that really sticks out to me is when a guy is walking by a fence and he sees a UFO and a Bigfoot and what looks like a younger adolescent or child Bigfoot next to him walking toward the UFO, and he's with his kids. One of the kids takes off, and his other kid says, "Shoot it, Daddy, shoot it." So he shoots the Bigfoot, and he said it sounded like you were shooting a bullet into a pond.
Oh, wow.
And the thing just stared at him.
Huh. Interesting. As the bullet struck the actual Bigfoot, he said it made a sound like it was hitting a pond.
That's right.
Huh. That's interesting. Never heard
Which
of
is
that.
very different than what, like, for example, the Kentucky Goblins case, or what we're hearing about in Peru, where it sounds like a metal bucket bouncing off of this thing.
Right.
So there are other instances, and there were several Bigfoot instances that happened all with UFOs in that same time frame in the early 1970s
Okay.
in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think Pennsylvania isn't. I think central Pennsylvania, I think, might be a hotbed for sightings like
It
that.
is, yeah. Pennsylvania, that whole area, and you and I lately have been doing a lot of research on megalithic structures, and there's a bunch up there.
Right.
So I don't know if there's a connection there or not, but that's pretty interesting. That's what we're looking into, and we don't really know yet. But
Right.
we're doing some pretty cool stuff, and we'll put it on the website. Actually, tell them a little bit about what you're doing, because I think it's so cool.
Well, no, I just came across. There's another triangle in Pennsylvania in that same area. I think I came across that same scenario in this Coleman book that talks about central northern Pennsylvania being a hotbed, and all these hotbeds of this phenomenon are discussed in the form of triangles. Right, the geographical area is always in a triangle. There's another one in Massachusetts. But, I have some experience in geographical research, and we're going to start mapping out these triangles, and not only triangles, but also what I found really fascinating is that Lauren Coleman has a book out, real extensive book on just the mysteries in America, and he talks about how you need to pay attention to places of interest that have the term devil in them. And so we're mapping out, we've got to map out everything with the term devil or Diablo. You have different, you have to look for different translations. But I think that's really fascinating because there's a lot of correlation, and we can do some statistical analysis to define some strengths and some correlation.
That's right. I mean, that makes a lot of sense because just like today, where we have even congressmen who think this is demonic or devil. I mean, this was probably associated with the same sort of evil in ancient times. And on top of doing all that, this guy also composes and records all this amazing music that you hear on this podcast. So, talented dude.
Who's that?
You, boy.
Me. You're talking about me. Yes, sir. We put a lot of work into this.
Well, I appreciate it, man. The music is great. It adds a really nice touch to my babbling and stuttering over this phenomenon. But yeah, I think it is phenomenon related. I could talk about this for probably another hour because Bigfoot makes me happy. That's why we titled the episode that, because I think that's central to understanding Bigfoot. This is modern folklore. This is folklore in the making. We're living through it. 1958, Sasquatch gets called Bigfoot. Now there's Bigfoot bumper stickers, Bigfoot choirs.
Right.
I mean, we're living through modern folklore, and 100 years from now, they're going to talk about us as a bunch of superstitious weirdos too. But
of course,
this is the process. We all wonder how this phenomenon was able to hide itself, and we're living in it.
Right. We got to talk about also, one of the I think most popular stories or efforts to debunk Bigfoot sightings is usually, I forgot the exact medical term, but a lot of people talk about how bears or maybe wolves can get some kind of mange disease where they lose fur, which I don't understand how that's related to Bigfoot because it's always usually furry, but they're on their hind legs. We got to talk about that.
Yes.
So that's always, it always comes up.
So there are a bunch of scientific explanations that try to maybe debunk or say these are the causes of misidentifications of Bigfoot. I mean, we could talk about some of those. There's the bear, obviously. I've seen bears walk on two legs, and that can throw some people. And there are some animal diseases that may cause some forms of mange and maybe cause them to stand more upright.
Right.
That might cause some misidentification. And then there's wishful thinking, I think, is the third one. There's people who really want Bigfoot to exist and be, something of a beautiful forest spirit. So that might cause some misidentifications too. Right.
I just don't know. I just remember there's one account. It wasn't actually a Bigfoot. It was more of the like a giant dog sighting. We could talk about that. It's another topic, the dog man. But
are you teasing our next episode?
Yeah, maybe we should.
That is our next episode.
Okay, yeah, that's
what
good.
We said. We were gonna do
right.
Mothman, Bigfoot, dog.
We're doing
man.
all the monsters. Yep.
You didn't even know you were segging our next episode.
Just naturally. Yeah. But there was one account, and I think it was part of Bridgewater Triangle that's located in Massachusetts, and that's just south of Boston. And that story stuck out to me because so it was a case of like a giant dog, and they had physical evidence that there were farmers that saw livestock being killed and all this other stuff, and people were actually hunting it down. Like law enforcement were trying to hunt something down. They didn't know what the hell it was, but were hunting it down.
Yeah, good point. I mean, animal mutilations do get caught up with Sasquatch a little bit too.
Yeah, yeah. But the end of the story was, which kind of intrigued me, was the last sighting was a police officer saw this giant dog out way in the distance on a railroad track, and he actually fired at it. And the last thing he said, the account was that it didn't respond, and all it did was slowly walk away into the brush,
Yes.
and that was the last anyone ever heard of it. It's such a strange
Yeah,
thing.
Terry Sherman. I guess we're teasing the next episode. So Terry Sherman he was the owner of Skinwalker Ranch when things went bananas. And one of the first things he saw was a giant wolf, like the size of a dire wolf, and said he shot it, and it just looked at him, and eventually walked away.
Huh? Yeah. Was that the end of it, or did it come back? Do you remember?
Well, they then encountered a series of various paranormal. A series of paranormal encounters, most of which were pretty, I guess we'll say, malevolent.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an experience they had at the end when they were leaving the ranch, where they said, an orb flew up to them and filled them with this wonderful, warm feeling.
Oh,
like a
one of
gentle
those.
goodbye.
Right.
And I find that very interesting. We don't talk about it enough, and I'm glad to just briefly mention it, which is that there are people who have positive experiences with this phenomenon.
Sure.
We've talked a lot about the negative, and we do think that probably the biggest reason you would have a right to know is that there is a real threat here sometimes. Right. But we need to balance it out and say it's not all threatening, and it's not all negative. There's a guy in the news right now and in the media named Chris Bledsoe who seems very authentic to me, and he's relaying a positive encounter.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely. You definitely have to point that out for sure. I mean, you have those cases of people, multiple cases where people have this sudden sense of well-being, and like everything's going to be okay right before the sighting.
Yeah, a sense of reassurance and something saying don't be afraid, and then you also get the other ones, which no one gets that sort of reassurance all the time. But we don't know how to interpret it yet. That's the purpose of the podcast. But I think we need to make sure that we balance that it's not all threatening.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
That's a good way to leave it. Until next time, because the dogman, it gets pretty bad. So,
Yeah, it does. You're right. Well, that's a good one. Yeah.
Bigfoot makes me happy, though.
Yeah, it makes us happy. And you know what? We could talk about this for days, but we're gonna end it there, and we're gonna tease the dogman. So, thanks for listening, everyone. This is the 14 Wins Podcast. Say goodbye.
Oh, yeah, goodbye.